Okay, so let's have a look at the first part of the Certified Ethical Hacker course. So this is split into 13 different units. This unit will focus on the business aspects of pen testing. Then from here we'll look at technical foundations of hacking, footprinting and scanning, enumeration and system hacking, Linux and automated security assessment tools, Trojans and backdoors, sniffers, session hijacks and denial of service, web server hacking, web applications and database attacks, wireless technologies, security and attacks, IDS firewalls and honeypots, buffer overflows, viruses and worms, cryptography attacks and defenses, and then finally social engineering and physical attacks. And basically what we have is that we have certain roles. We have Bob and Alice, and Bob and Alice want to be able to communicate together and keep their conversations private from the intruder, or the hacker in this case, who is Eve. Often Alice and Bob want to be able to identify each other, so we can have another role called Trent, and Trent is a trusted third party identity. Okay, so let's look at the first part, the first unit, into the business aspects of pen testing. Okay, so in this unit we'll look at the basic security triad, which is confidentiality, integrity and availability. We'll try and define some of the things to do with ethical hacking and list some of the key elements related to security. We'll also describe some ethical hackers and the basic duties, along with modes of ethical hacking, some test deliverables, and the laws related to computer crimes. Okay, so ethical hackers really sit on this side, and they're there to do good. They can be described as a white hat, and a white hat main objective is to do good. A black hat, on the other hand, has malicious intents. And sometimes someone can be a white hat, and other times they could be a black hat, so they are defined as grey hats. So there's been a history of people who have been black hats in the past, and now who are doing some good, and they are now protecting systems. Some of the other roles that we might see is a cracker, who are motivated by financial gain, and they typically have some criminal intent. We have script kiddies, and script kiddies often do not have a strong technical background and are using standard tools to be able to attack systems. These types of intruders are often the easiest to defend against, in that many of the defense systems know how these tools actually work. We can have a software cracker, and they often try to reverse engineer applications, such as cracking well-known applications, and to determine the code. From there they can actually implement some sort of backdoor or to breach license conditions. We can have phreakers, and phreakers are intruders who hack the telephone systems in order to possibly not pay for any telephone calls and so on. We can have a hacktivist, who tend to have political agendas. And then we can have a whacker, who focus on wireless LANs. Within a system there are certain key terms that we need to understand. The key one that we have is a risk, and a risk relates to the likelihood that the occurrence of something that could do some sort of harm or damage to a system. So a typical risk might be the loss of power, or a risk might relate to a hurricane happening. Then we have the term threat, and that is something that could cause the actual harm or damage to some form of asset which the organization will own. So this could be computer systems, or it could be data, or it could even be the people employed inside the company. So these threats typically look at exploiting some sort of vulnerability within the system, and that is generally defined as a weakness, an overall weakness inside the system. For this, it needs to be an exploit which will then take advantage of the vulnerability in the system. So what we have in terms of ethical hacking is that we have the white hat who will then do an evaluation of the security of the system. To do this, they typically use an evaluator from outside and then some form of evaluation software. So as we'll see, this could include Nmap, hping, Nessus, and so on. These are automated vulnerability assessment tools. So they're typically a target of interest, so it might be a server, it might be a whole network infrastructure, or it could be even firewalls. And the white hat will then craft packets which will be able to assess the target of evaluation. This can include a white box test, and this is where there is extensive knowledge of the target of interest. We can have grey box testing, and this is where we only have partial knowledge of the actual target of evaluation. And then finally we have black box testing, which has no knowledge of the target of interest. The advantage of black box testing is that often it is not the designer of the test is unbiased by any of the elements of the system. The tester also has no prior knowledge of the system, therefore has no general preset ideas about what to expect, and would obviously look at the system in the same way as an intruder possibly would into the system. Unfortunately, black box testing takes much more time to perform the security testing. It's also generally more expensive than the other methods, and it often only focuses on what external attackers will generally see. As has been shown in the past, many systems are weak because they are attacked by insiders. So black box testing is often done outside the network. So in terms of the defences that we are trying to assess, we might have an intrusion detection system such as Snort, we have firewalls, and we can have servers. A key feature of any testing is that there is generally a code of ethics associated with it. So a good focus for these is never to exceed the authorization limits, always be ethical in everything that's actually done, so that information from the test is not leaked out, limit any possible damage inside the tests, and make sure there is confidentiality throughout the tests. So often we go through three main phases within a pen test. There is a level 1 test, and that's really the high level testing of the system and doesn't really involve any hands-on. So it might involve a look around a site, observing where servers are, and so on. The next part is a level 2 test. So there's normally some agreement after the level 1 from the company and the tester. Level 2 is a network evaluation, and that typically involves information gathering, such as the scanning of the network and then looking at any vulnerabilities. So this is where we might get tools such as Nessus and Nmap involved. Then, once vulnerabilities are there, then the white hat will take an adversarial role to actually perform the penetration testing. So this might do damage to the system, but all damage that's created will hopefully be reversed. So some of the things that might involve with these tests include some sort of physical entry attack. We might get a stolen equipment attack, such as taking servers and computers away. And we might also get some sort of social engineering, where the white hat might ask someone in the organization for their password and user ID. And then we might also get an insider attack, where the white hat actually goes inside the network infrastructure and takes an adversarial role within it. So typical key skills include around routers, firewalls, and Windows and Linux operating systems, and also an in-depth knowledge of network protocols. We can also get an outsider attack, where we can actually see how well the firewalls and the routers cope to external threats. A key focal point within Certified Ethical Hacker is CIA. So C stands for Confidentiality, and that's to make sure that only authorized entities can get access to sensitive data. So that might include locked doors, having armed guards, building fences as a deterrent, having firewalls on the outside of the network, have strong passwords, using encryption for data, and for external access, have VPN tunnels. For integrity, we need to make sure that the data by unauthorized entities is always detected, and that only authorized entities can actually change any sensitive data. So this might include access control into the system. We can have Windows file protection to understand when things have been changed. The MD5 checksum, we'll see later on, provides a way to verify that things haven't been changed, such as application programs, along with SHA-1, which is a better method of creating a hash signature. We can have network operating systems, and we can use software such as Tripwire, which will be able to detect when an intruder gains access and changes a file. Then we can have availability, and for this it is only authorized entities who have continual access to the data. So this might involve having failover equipment, such as failover servers. If one server fails, then another one will kick in. We can have mirror servers who will be working in tandem with each other and synchronizing the data, even down to the processes level. So if one falls over, the other one can take its place. We can have backups, typically with inside SANs, disk arrays, or tape backups. And we can use RAID for our hard disks, so that if one hard disk fails, then it doesn't affect the overall storage capacity. Some of the threats that we face include denial of service or a distributed denial of service. In this, the intruder has a certain target, so in this case we have a web server, and it is possible for the intruder to then make continual accesses to that server, such as continual connections, and then in which case the resources of the web server become depleted, so that Bob cannot get a good quality service from the server. So it might hog CPU or memory or even network resources. So we can see here that the network might get clogged up if there were too many of these remote agents making connections, so that Bob is starved of bandwidth. So denial of service is typically where one machine attacks another machine, where distributed denial of service is where we can have it over a large scale infrastructure, and it's often difficult to actually switch off the attackers. We might also get stolen, lost, damaged, modified data. This is where the data is changed in some way by our intruders. So it could be people spying on data. It could be to do with dumpster diving, such as logical scavenging, where USB sticks and CD-ROMs and discarded media might get picked up and examined. It can relate to the physical removal of equipment, and even around physical attacks on equipment. We can also get unauthorized access. This is where an intruder will try to gain access to a valid username and ID and able to get access to some confidential data. We can also have the disclosure of confidential information. So this could lead to losses of revenue, potential liabilities, and so on. So it's always important that employees are kept informed as to what information they can actually disclose to external parties. We can have hacker attacks, and this is where we can have either inside or outside attack, where someone tries to attack the whole infrastructure, either for the systems and or the data. Viruses are an obvious problem, and a virus is typically is a program which self-replicates itself. And we can also have worms, and a worm will try to use up the resources of the system or systems that it's used on. So it might use up CPU, disk, network, memory, and so on, but we generally try to hog the resources. A growing threat is cyber-terrorism, and that's attacks on national infrastructures. So this could relate to power plants. Power plants are obviously important because they provide the electrical energy for the internet and for much of business. It might involve attacks on oil refineries and so on. Another threat is around natural disasters, including storms, hurricanes, fires, floods, earthquakes, and all other natural events. Some of the things that might be vulnerable inside a system include the application software itself, and though those are the programs that actually run on the system, typically within an operating system. The operating system itself could be vulnerable to certain types of attacks, in this case Windows and Ubuntu here. We can also have configuration files inside the system which will set up devices and the system itself. These could be vulnerable to attack. And the general firmware, which is the software that's stored within a ROM, so that which is loaded when the system starts up. Typically we also have software patches which will try to fix and update our application software, our operating systems, and even inside our firmware. Okay, so what's the basic procedures that must happen before a pen test is done? Well, typically written permission is required from the organisation, and this is typically done at a high level, such as with the CEO or managing director of a company. After this, the project is then scoped to define how far the actual test will go. After approval, then the test is performed, and then after that there is some post-assessment activities such as report writing. So What's some of the reasons that we might want to do some of these tests? Well, the key regulations within the US relate to the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, which allows banks, security firms, insurance companies and so on to merge and share their data. An important act in the US is HIPAA and around the world, and HIPAA relates to the data security within a healthcare environment. Then we can have CeH, which is security and freedom through encryption, which actually defines the rights that US citizens have when they're using encryption, without the need for their keys to be stored in some sort of public place. There's Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which define the penalties related to hacking incidents. We have the Privacy Act of 1974, which protects the rights of individuals unless they have given permission to do so, a little bit like the Data Protection Act in the UK. We have the Federal Information Security Management Act, which focuses on the yearly audits of companies, basically around the security of these. The Economic Espionage Act, which aims to criminalise the misuse of trade secrets, such as for spying and so on. And then we have the Patriot Act, which allows the government to monitor hackers without a warning. The equivalent in the UK is the RIPA Act, which allows the ISPs to keep track of suspects. Then we have the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which is related to transparent accounting and reporting of companies. Another important standard related to security started life inside the UK as a BS standard, but has now been standardised on an international basis as ISO 27701 and ISO 27702. This focuses on key areas related to security, such as business continuity planning, and it's to make sure that that there is some form of procedures that will protect the basic critical business processes. So this might relate to a serious fire or a hurricane and so on, and make sure that the company has some sort of continuity in these events. We can have access control, which actually defines the nature of which access is allowed inside the organisation, such as detecting unauthorised activities and preventing them too. We can have system acquisition, development and maintenance, and that's to make sure that the equipment that's bought is actually secure, and there is generally a focus on preventing loss, modification or misuse of user data. It also includes the physical and environmental security, so that's to stop any unauthorised access or damage to equipment, and obviously prevent theft. A key area is around compliance, and that's to comply with any criminal or civil law, statutory requirements, or basic contractual obligations of the organisation. We can have human resource security, and that's to make sure that the employees that we take on are of good character and do not have problems from the past. Also that the organisation learns from mistakes that humans have made in the past. We can have organisational security, and that's generally how the whole organisation is set up, such as who's responsible for any security incident. A key area is related to computer and network management, and that's to make sure that all the devices are secure and there isn't any interruptions to the business activity. We can have asset classification and control, and to make sure that all the assets are protected in some way. There is a key area around security policies, and make sure that all the people inside the organisation understand the policy. Then we can have additional ones, such as looking at risk analysis, what are the key risks to the business, and also how we deal with any security management activity. Some of the hackers from the past include these. We have John Draper, who was known as Captain Crunch, because he managed to get a whistle from a serial packet, and he used this whistle to tune into 2.6 kilohertz, which allowed him to place long distance calls. We have Mark Ebini, who was fibre optic, and he formed the Masters of Deception in 1990 and was then arrested in 1992. Robert Morris actually released the first computer worm, known as the Morris worm, in 1998 from Cornell University Labs, and was actually the son of the chief scientist at the NSA. We have Vladimir Levin, who was a Russian who siphoned off millions from Citibank. And then we have these three hackers. We have Adrian Lamo, who was known as the homeless hacker, and he exploited weaknesses in many companies, including Microsoft, NBC, and the New York Times. We have Kevin Mitnick, who was known as the Condor. He was the first hacker on the FBI's wanted list and broke into Digital DEC, Nokia, Fujitsu, and a few other companies. He was arrested in 1994 and is now a security consultant. Then we have Kevin Poulsen, who was known as Dark Dante, and he took over all the phones in Los Angeles in 1990 so that he could win a Porsche 944. Okay, so that's outlined some of the basic areas around Unit 1. Okay, so let's now go and take one of the tests. Okay, so there's a number of tests that we can actually take. So we could try the first challenge. Okay, so you find there are approximately 10 questions, and they should change each time. Okay, so which is an executable program which runs on a computer. So let's go for application software. Which is where an intruder simulates an attack over the internet. That sounds like an outsider attack. At any time we can actually find out a basic explanation of the answer. Okay, which can be defined as the best definition of confidentiality. So we want to say that one, which is the correct order for an assessment. So passive information gathering is really the first thing that we would do. So an ethical hacker is a white hat. And which regulations respects the rights of the individual unless permission is given. Sounds like the Privacy Act. For integrity, let's go for change. in the US, which is the main statute for computer crime related to fraud and related activities. So for fraud and related activities, we actually have crimes and criminal procedures 1029 and 1030. So let's take a guess at that one. So this is the ISO standard. So questions for the ethical hacker: what's the budget? When are the tests to be done? What is the mission of the organization? What are the outcomes that the organization expects? It's unlikely they'll ask about overtime payments. Okay, so let's have a look at how we've actually done. Okay, so we got that one right, got that one correct, that one correct, 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 correct. Oh, so the main statute for computer crime related to fraud and related activities is sections 1030. We got that one right and that one right. Okay, so that shows a basic test. Let's have a look at the fun test. Okay, so an ethical hacker should maintain confidentiality. Yes. Which test involves taking an adversarial role? Okay, as we've seen, that was the pen testing. What is the likelihood of the occurrence of something that could cause harm, loss, or damage? Okay, so let's go for, let's take and ask the audience. Okay, so it looks like the audience are telling us that that is a risk. And they were correct. Which attack tests employees for weaknesses in the procedures? So that sounds like a social engineering attack. What helps with integrity? So what we'd want is possibly, let's take 50-50 here, and it looks like it's access control, which is where an intruder simulates attacks over the internet. Sounds like an outsider attack, which could target obtaining equipment in order to gain a privileged information. So let's go for stolen equipment attack. So level 2 assessment, level 1 is high level, and then level 2 is network evaluation followed by pen testing. So let's go for network evaluation. What helps with integrity? So an MD5 signature checksum helps to make sure that the data hasn't been changed, which does not focus on technical systems or physical access. Or on physical access. So that, let's go for A, and we're wrong. Okay, so that gives you an idea of the tests.